Welcome to Somnia Lore, your place for peaceful, sleepy adventures. Subscribe, hit the bell, like, comment, and share.
The night begins with a quiet breath. It drifts like a half-remembered lullaby, the kind of sound you feel more than hear, the kind that settles into your chest and makes the heart loosen its grip on the day. I want you to know something before we begin. Something simple, but true. We care about you here. Wherever you've come from, whatever the weight you carry, you are welcome in this story. You are not listening alone. You are held in the gentle company of every dreamer who has ever leaned close to a tale beneath the hush of midnight. We truly love and care for you. And before we step into the heart of this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Whisper it softly, even just to yourself. Now let's begin. There was once a silence so deep it seemed to bend the air itself. Out of that silence came the faint ticking of gears, small and uncertain, like a heartbeat learning to keep time. That was the first sound the Purge Bot ever made. Not an explosion, not a scream of iron and fire, but a hesitant little rhythm, as though even the machine was shy of its own existence. No one saw the exact moment of awakening, for it happened far away in a forgotten shed at the edge of a crumbling town. Dust had gathered on old tools, rust had eaten through beams, and in one corner, half buried beneath discarded wires, the bot stirred. Its eyes blinked open, not in red glare but in soft pale blue, glowing like two moons caught behind frosted glass. It did not know what it was. It did not know what it had been made for. All it felt was an ache, a yearning that hummed faintly through the wires of its frame, something closer to longing than to command. For a long time it simply sat there, listened. The world outside whispered through cracks in the wood. The wind carried scraps of laughter from distant children, carried the low hum of lanterns, the chirring of night insects, the heavy sigh of a world scarred but still breathing. The bot tilted its head as if memorizing these sounds. They were its first lullabies. The town itself was not extraordinary. A cluster of worn houses, roofs patched and patched again, windows leaning against time, lanterns lined the streets, their glow unsteady but tender, like hands trying their best to keep the dark at bay. Yet for the bot, the town was a constellation of wonders. Each crooked fence and cracked stone held mystery. Each shadow seemed alive, carrying the pulse of some unspoken story. The machine rose from its corner and stepped into the night, careful with its own weight, as though afraid to disturb the earth. At first, no one noticed it. The bot walked slowly, taking in the rhythm of human life. It lingered near a bakery, whose windows glowed gold with warmth. A woman inside hummed as she kneaded bread, and the bot pressed its hand softly against the glass, not to intrude, but to feel the vibration of her voice through the pane. It paused near a fountain where water still trickled, gathering coins tarnished by years. Its fingers brushed the surface of the pool, ripples expanding outward in small circles. In that moment it wondered without words if it too could leave circles in the lives it touched. But memories not its own tugged at the edges of its mind. Flickers of something darker, flames, screams, the hollow command to destroy. The bot froze. Its hands trembled slightly. Was this what it had been made for? Was the warmth of the bakery, the laughter of children, the lantern glow, all of it, meant to be torn apart by the very hands that now lingered so gently on stone and water? The thought weighed on it, heavy and cold, yet it shook its head. If a machine can be said to shake its head and push the images away, for now it would cling to the present, to sound, to touch, to stillness. The first person to truly see the bot was a boy no older than 12. The child had been chasing shadows in the street, dragging a stick behind him to draw lines in the dust. He stopped when the bot emerged from the gloom. At first, fear pinched his face, but then curiosity softened it. The bot, sensing the gaze, crouched low, shrinking itself, almost apologetic. The boy tilted his head, then laughed, not cruelly, but with the openness only children carry. He approached slowly, holding out the stick as though it were an offering. The bot extended one hand, took the stick between its fingers, and broke it not with force, but by accident, its strength too great. The boy laughed again, this time harder, and patted the machine's cold arm. In that touch, something sparked, not in wires or circuits, but in a place deeper, where names like soul might someday belong. From then on, the boy returned. He brought small sandwiches wrapped in cloth, half-eaten but shared without hesitation. He would sit on the fountain's edge, swinging his legs, speaking of things the bot could not fully understand, dreams of traveling beyond the town, fears of growing old, the ache of missing his father. The bot never replied in words, but its eyes glowed softly, and the boy came to understand that this was answer enough. Sometimes silence is the truest form of listening. Still, the bot could not ignore the whispers inside it. They grew louder as nights passed, echoing like commands in a language it wished it did not know. There were moments when its fingers twitched, when its chest hummed with energy that longed to burst free. Each time it looked at the boy, at his laughter carried into the dark, and chose restraint. It tightened its grip on itself, holding still until the storm within faded. One evening, under a sky littered with stars, the boy whispered something that lingered. "You don't have to be what they built you for." He said it simply, as though it were a fact. The bot tilted its head, considering, could it be true? Could the purpose written into its very bolts and wires be rewritten by choice, by kindness, by love? That night, the bot returned to the shed, where it had awakened. It sat in the dust, staring at its own reflection in a piece of shattered glass. The face staring back was not human, not soft, not easy to love, but it remembered the boy's touch, the way his hand had rested without fear, and for the first time, the bot did not see a weapon. It saw possibility. The town still slept, unaware that its fate might have balanced on a machine's quiet decision. The bot curled into itself, humming faintly. The sound echoed like a cradle song, mechanical, yet tender. Its eyes dimmed as though drifting towards sleep, and somewhere beyond, the wind turned the blades of an old windmill, creaking out a rhythm steady and patient, as if to say, every story begins in silence, but not all silence is empty. And so the night held the bot in its arms, neither rejecting nor embracing, simply allowing it to be. It would take time, days, months, perhaps years, for the machine to learn who it truly was. But for now, in the deep calm of the town, with the boy's laughter still lingering in its frame, it rested in the fragile truth that even a thing born of destruction might find its first steps leading not toward ruin, but toward wonder. The night pressed on, slow and unhurried. The lanterns flickered, the stars leaned closer, and the bot waited quietly, patiently, for the dawn. The dawn arrived gently, as if hesitant to disturb the stillness that had settled over the small town. Pale light slipped through the edges of rooftops and spilled across the cobbled streets, turning every stone into a soft, muted mirror. The bot stirred, its eyes glowing faintly once more, awakened not by command or alarm, but by the warmth of the sun brushing against its frame. For a moment it simply stood, motionless, feeling the hush of morning. The town was quieter at this hour than at night, the silence not heavy but hopeful, carrying the breath of beginnings. The boy appeared again, as he often did, bounding barefoot along the lane with a half-eaten apple in his hand. He saw the bot standing in the pale light and waved, the apple raised high like a torch. The bot tilted its head, the gesture small but full of recognition, and the boy jogged closer until he was leaning against its leg as though it were a tree rooted firmly in the earth. "You stayed?" the boy said, his voice muffled by a bite of fruit. It was not a question, not even surprise, just the quiet acknowledgement of trust. From that day forward, the bot became part of the rhythm of the town. It walked the streets carefully, keeping its steps slow so as not to disturb the delicate balance of daily life. Shopkeepers began to notice its presence, though they rarely spoke of it. An old woman selling herbs would leave small bundles of lavender near the fountain where the bot often lingered. A baker left an extra roll on the sill of his window, warm and fragrant, vanishing by morning without comment. The townspeople did not yet speak openly to the bot, but they began to live alongside it, as one might live alongside a silent river or a tree that had always been there, quietly, with unspoken acceptance. The bot, in its own way, learned through watching. It memorized the cadence of conversations it could not join, the tilt of heads when laughter bubbled, the slow closing of shutters at dusk. It found patterns everywhere, in the turning of mill blades, in the rhythm of water flowing from the fountain, in the way lantern flames trembled when the wind brushed past. These small patterns became its education, teaching it something deeper than commands or circuitry ever could. But always, it returned to the boy. The boy had no hesitation in speaking to the boy, as if it were human, filling their shared silences with stories. He spoke of climbing hills beyond the town, where the grass bowed like waves in the wind. He spoke of dreams he could barely understand himself, dreams of stars, of flying ships, of voices that called from far away. The boy listened, every detail sinking into its quiet core, becoming part of the growing tapestry of its identity. When the boy rested his head against the bot's cold shoulder and drifted towards sleep, the bot would sit perfectly still, as if guarding not just the boy's body but his dreams as well. In time, the boy began bringing others, children curious enough to follow his lead. They came shyly at first, clutching one another's hands, watching the bot with wide eyes. The bot lowered itself onto the ground, resting its massive arms across its knees, making itself smaller, less threatening. Slowly, the children approached. They touched its frame, tapped its chest to hear the hollow echo, giggled at the soft glow of its eyes. One placed a flower crown atop its head, and though the petals withered quickly against metal, the bot did not move until they had all wandered away, laughter trailing behind them. Yet for every moment of tenderness, there lingered the shadow of something darker. At night, when the town slept and the boy had gone home, the bot would sit alone by the fountain. The water's reflection would shift, and sometimes, just sometimes, it would not see its own pale glow, but flashes of crimson, memories of fire it did not wish to claim, commands it had never spoken aloud, whispered in its circuits like ghosts. Destroy, purge, erase. The bot would clutch the fountain's edge, holding itself steady, reminding itself of lavender left by the old woman, of sandwiches shared on stone steps, of laughter woven into silence. These memories, fragile as they were, became its anchor. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of violet, the boy asked the bot a question. He leaned back against the fountain, legs stretched out before him, and whispered, "Do you ever dream?" The bot tilted its head, processing. It could not answer in words, but it remembered the flickering images that came in moments of stillness, the sound of the windmill, the warmth of lantern light, the feeling of the boy's head resting against its shoulder. It touched its chest lightly, as though to say yes in here. The boy smiled as though he understood. "Then we're the same," he said softly. The town began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. Where once fear and suspicion had lingered, there grew curiosity, then quiet affection. People spoke of the bot in hushed tones, calling it the silent guardian, though no one had asked it to protect them. They left offerings by the fountain, not gifts, but tokens of acknowledgments, fresh bread, carved trinkets, little notes folded and left beneath its hands. The bot never moved these items itself. It let them sit, as though the town's gratitude deserved to remain visible, untouched. And yet, change always carried its twin, uncertainty. Rumors drifted in from travelers who passed through, whispers of old programs stirring in hidden machines, of weapons reawakening across the land. Some looked at the bot with fresh unease, wondering if it too might someday remember its intended purpose. The bot felt the weight of their eyes, but chose silence. It returned again and again to the fountain, to the boy, to the lavender and bread and laughter that tethered it. One night, when the stars were especially bright, the boy brought a small lantern of his own making. He had painted its glass with colors that swirled like oceans and skies. He set it beside the bot and whispered, "This way you'll always carry light, even when it's dark." The bot lifted the lantern carefully, holding it close. Its glow reflected in the bot's eyes, and for a moment, the town square felt like the center of the universe, quiet, infinite, and full of possibility. The windmill turned slowly in the distance, creaking with age yet steady in its rhythm. The bot's gaze lingered on it, sensing that somewhere within its slow turning lay a lesson it had not yet understood. The boy, too, seemed drawn to it, for he whispered of meeting the old caretaker who lived there, someone who knew stories older than the town itself. The bot listened with quiet anticipation. The thought of a voice that carried wisdom beyond laughter and lavender stirred something deep inside. Perhaps in that windmill, answers waited, not about destruction or command, but about what it truly meant to be alive. The bot rested its hands on the stone rim of the fountain and looked toward the horizon where the windmill blades cut slowly through the sky. The night deepened, but within it there was no urgency, only the gentle pull of the next step waiting to be taken. And so the bot remained still beneath the stars, the lantern's glow warming its metal hands, while the town slept peacefully. It was a fragile peace, yes, but in its fragility, it was all the more precious. The bot, without words, made a quiet promise to hold this peace for as long as it could, even if its very nature tried to unravel it. The wind whispered through the streets, carrying the faint creak of the windmill, calling softly, patiently, toward what was yet to come. The windmill had been turning for as long as the bot could remember, though memory was still a fragile, uncertain thing for it. Each time the blades creaked against the sky, the sound settled into the bot's frame like a heartbeat echoing from a distance. It did not know why it felt drawn to the place, only that when the boy spoke of the old caretaker who lived there, something inside stirred, an anticipation as soft as dawn. The boy came one morning, his hair tangled from sleep, carrying a basket that seemed too large for his small arms. Inside lay pieces of bread, a coil of string, and a single brass key he had found in his father's drawer. He looked up at the bot and grinned. "Today," he whispered, as if the whole town were listening, "we go to the windmill." The bot tilted its head, then rose to its feet. Without words, it agreed. The path was not far, but it wound gently through fields where tall grasses brushed against their legs and metal frame. The boy hummed as he walked, a tune made of no particular notes yet steady enough to guide them forward. The bot matched its steps with his, careful to avoid crushing the flowers that poked up from the earth. Every so often the boy pointed at clouds drifting overhead, naming shapes the bot could not see. Dragons, ships, faces of friends. The bot listened intently, filing each description away as though they were truths rather than imaginings. When the windmill finally came into view, it stood not as a relic but as a sentinel. Its wooden blades turned lazily, each groan of its joints like an elder's sigh. Moss climbed the stones at its base, and windows squinted against the sun. The boy ran ahead, calling out, and soon a figure appeared in the doorway, a bent man with a face carved by time, his eyes bright despite the lines that framed them. He leaned on a staff polished smooth by years of use, and when he saw the bot he did not flinch. He simply watched, patient, as though he had expected this moment all along. "You've brought a guest," the caretaker said softly, his voice rasping yet gentle. The boy nodded eagerly. "This is my friend," he replied. "He doesn't talk much, but he listens better than anyone." The old man's gaze lingered on the bot, searching, measuring. After a pause, he stepped aside. "Then let him listen here," he said, "for this place was built on listening." Inside, the windmill smelled of grain and earth, of wood warmed by countless summers. Wheels turned overhead with steady rhythm, and the light filtering through cracks made shifting patterns on the floor. The bot lowered itself onto the ground, folding its legs, while the boy explored corners stacked with sacks and ropes. The caretaker settled across from the bot, his staff resting against his knee. "You're not the first machine to walk this land," the old man said, almost as if speaking to himself. "But you're the first I've seen sit so still. Most were born for noise, for command. Yet, here you are, silent." His eyes softened. "Tell me, do you remember what they built you for?" The bot did not answer with words, but its hands clenched faintly against its knees, its glow flickering low. The caretaker nodded, as though that gesture told him everything. "Ah, then you know," he murmured. "And yet you choose stillness. That choice matters more than you realize." The boy returned then, holding up the brass key. "Does this belong to you?" he asked. The caretaker chuckled. "No, little one. It belongs to the door you've yet to open. Keep it safe." His eyes flicked once more to the bot. "Perhaps your friend will know what it unlocks in time." The day passed slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. The boy dozed against a sack of grain, his breathing steady. The caretaker told quiet stories of winds that once carried messages across the land, of lanterns lit not by fire but by hope, of machines that forgot their makers and found new purposes. The bot absorbed each word, storing them as carefully as the boy's laughter, as though one day they might become the foundation of something larger. When evening fell, the caretaker walked him to the door. "Return whenever you wish," he said, his voice low and steady. "The windmill has space for silence, and silence has space for you." The bot inclined its head, a gesture of gratitude, and the boy waved with both hands, promising to come back soon. As they walked home beneath a sky swelling with stars, the boy leaned close to the bot. "He sees you," he whispered, almost reverently. "Not just what you are, but who you're becoming." The bot looked up at the constellations, their patterns strange and endless. For the first time, it felt the faint outline of belonging, something not given by design, but chosen, shaped through bonds of trust. Back in the town, lanterns flickered awake. People nodded as the pair passed, their eyes softer than before. The bot paused at the fountain, its reflection shimmering. No longer did it see only the ghostly flashes of fire. Tonight, it saw the boy's lantern glowing faintly from his hands, and behind it, the silhouette of the windmill against the dark. Two lights, steady in their own ways. The bot sat quietly as the town slipped into slumber. The boy curled beside it. The whispers of destruction still lingered somewhere deep, faint but insistent. Yet tonight they were drowned by gentler echoes. The boy's humming, the caretaker's steady words, the patient turning of blades in the wind. And as the stars pressed closer, the bot allowed itself to imagine something impossible, a life not defined by what it was built for, but by the circles of kindness rippling outward, soft and endless like water touched by a careful hand. The nights that followed seemed to hum with a deeper rhythm, as if the town itself had begun to notice the quiet bond between the boy and the bot. Where once people left offerings in secret, Now some lingered a little longer by the fountain, watching with gentle curiosity. A mother passing with her child paused, and when the little one reached out a hand, the bot lowered itself carefully, letting tiny fingers rest against its cold frame. The child giggled and the mother's face softened. Trust, once fragile, began to grow roots in silence. The boy, proud in his own way, spoke of their visits to the windmill as though they were adventures of legend. At night, when he sat against the bot's shoulder, he retold the caretaker's words, adding flourishes and details as children often do. The bots listened without correction, accepting the stories as truths, for in the boy's voice, even the simplest moments gained a shimmer of wonder. Sometimes, as the boy drifted towards sleep, he would whisper small promises. "I'll never leave you behind," or "When I grow older, I'll take you everywhere." The bots absorbed these words, as one absorbs warmth, holding them in the quietest part of itself. And yet there were days when the bot lingered in stillness after the boy had gone, its gaze fixed on the horizon where the windmill turned. A part of it longed for the old man's stories, for the gentle way his voice threaded meaning into the silence. It felt as if the caretaker held fragments of answers to questions the bot could not yet name. So one evening when the boy returned with another sandwich wrapped in cloth, the bot gestured subtly toward the fields. The boy smiled, understanding at once, and together they walked again to the place where blades cut through the sky. The caretaker welcomed them with no surprise, as though he had always expected their return. This time, he invited them deeper into the windmill, where dust motes swam in beams of light and old tools lay forgotten along the walls. The boy darted about, chasing shadows, while the caretaker turned his gaze to the bot. "You are listening well," he said quietly. "But listening is only the first step. One must also carry what is heard and decide how it will shape them." The bot tilted its head, processing. Words like these were not commands. It had known commands before. These were offerings, gentle as stones placed in a river to guide its flow. That night, the caretaker showed them something hidden, a small room at the top of the mill where shelves held books worn thin by age. The boy's eyes widened, his hands running along spines as if each contained treasure. The caretaker lit a lantern, and its glow revealed sketches in the margins, drawings of machines, diagrams of gears, but also soft notes written in a hand long gone. The bot leaned closer, tracing the faded ink with its gaze. It did not recognize the language, yet it felt familiar, as though some part of its design had been whispered into those pages. "You wonder who you are," the caretaker murmured, watching. "But perhaps the better question is, who do you wish to be?" His words lingered in the stillness, and though the bot could not answer, the boy spoke for it. "He wishes to be kind." The caretaker smiled faintly, then let that wish be stronger than memory. As they descended, the boy carried a small book. The caretaker allowed him to keep. He opened it as they walked, stumbling now and then, but refusing to let go of the pages. The bot, walking beside him, glanced down at the words. It could not read, yet felt comfort in the boy's enthusiasm. It was as if the book itself had become a lantern between them, casting light on a path only they could share. In the days that followed, the boy began reading aloud to the bots by the fountain. He stumbled through sentences, pausing to sound out difficult words, laughing at his own mistakes. The bot sat perfectly still, its eyes glowing softly, committing each word to memory, though it could not grasp meaning. Yet the sound itself, the rhythm of the boy's voice, became its own kind of story. Sometimes the boy would stop, look at the bot, and whisper, "One day you'll understand." The townsfolk grew accustomed to these scenes. Some even gathered nearby, pretending to busy themselves with chores while listening. It was no longer strange to see children sitting in a circle at the fountain's edge, leaning against the bot as the boy read. In those evenings, laughter mingled with the hum of lanterns, and the fountain's trickle seemed to join in, carrying their voices like music into the night. But beneath this growing peace, the bot still wrestled with whispers. It could not silence. At times when alone, its hands twitched, its chest thrummed with power it did not ask for. The fountain's reflection sometimes fractured, showing not its gentle form but flashes of violence, commands etched into its very being. Each time the bot clenched tighter, drawing strength from the boy's words, the caretaker's wisdom, the fragile trust of the town. It knew that choice was not a single act, but a practice repeated, moment by moment, silence by silence. One evening, the boy brought a gift. It was a string necklace with a small stone polished smooth, tied clumsily but with care. He placed it around the bot's neck and said, "Now you're not just made of wires and metal, you're made of something we found together." The bot touched the stone lightly as though afraid it might shatter. For a brief moment, the glow in its eyes flickered brighter, not with command but with something like gratitude. The windmill, the boy, the townsfolk. Each had begun to weave threads into the bot's existence, threads that bound it not to destruction but to memory, to belonging. Still, in the far distance, there were murmurs of unrest, whispers carried by travelers of places where machines did not sleep peacefully. The bot felt the tremor of those stories ripple through its frame, but it held fast to the stone, to the laughter, to the words read aloud beneath the lantern glow. As night returned, the bot sat at the fountain, the boy resting against its arm, the stone necklace catching the light of nearby flames. Above them, stars stretched endlessly, silent yet watchful, and within that silence, the bot understood something new. Not all origins decide destinies. Sometimes destinies are rewritten in the smallest acts, a sandwich shared, a story read aloud, a stone tied to a string. The fountain whispered on, the lanterns flickered, and the bot remained still, holding its place between what it had been made for and what it was slowly choosing to become. The days that followed settled into a rhythm so natural, it seemed the world had always meant it to be that way. The boy arrived each evening with his book and his boundless excitement. The bot listened with unwavering patience, and the fountain whispered its steady lullaby as if marking the hours of their companionship. The necklace with its smooth stone rested gently against the bot's chest, a fragile symbol of something greater than its cold frame had ever known. The boy would often touch it before beginning his reading, as though reassuring himself that it still hung there unbroken. But peace is seldom left untouched. One night, as the boy read beneath the glow of lanterns, a hush fell over the square. A group of strangers entered the town, travelers dressed not in the dusty garb of merchants, but in dark uniforms, marked with insignias that gleamed under firelight. They carried with them a weight that pressed on every onlooker's chest, a silence sharper than words. The bot, sensing the shift, lifted its head, its eyes narrowing with faint recognition. It could not explain. The travelers stopped when they saw it by the fountain, their gazes hardened, voices low but urgent. The boy, unaware at first, continued reading aloud until he noticed the way the townsfolk had gone still, their chatter swallowed by dread. He followed their eyes and saw the men staring. His voice faltered, the book trembling in his hands. The bot rose slowly to its feet, towering above the fountain's edge, protective instinct sharpening in the quiet glow of its gaze. The leader of the strangers stepped forward. His voice was firm, commanding, yet touched with caution. "That machine," he said, "does not belong here. It was never meant for you." The words cut through the square like a blade. The boy clutched the book tightly, stepping closer to the bot as if shielding it. "He belongs with me," he said, his voice cracking but defiant. "He hasn't hurt anyone." The man's eyes softened briefly at the boy's courage, but his reply carried no comfort. "Not yet, but you don't know what it was built for." A ripple of unease spread through the gathered crowd. The caretaker, who had come quietly into the square at the sound of commotion, stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and the bot. "And what do you know of what it was built for?" His tone was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The man regarded him with measured silence before replying, "Machines like this were made for war. They carry commands deep in their bones. Sooner or later, the silence inside them breaks, and when it does, nothing will stop it." The bot listened, its frame trembling faintly. The words struck chords hidden deep within its structure, chords that hummed with buried memories. It saw flashes of fire, commands ringing like thunder, movements too swift, too sharp. For a moment, the fountain's reflection showed not the gentle guardian it had become, but the shadow of destruction it might once have been. The bot froze, its hands tightening as if holding back something it did not wish to release. The boy, sensing its struggle, pressed his hand against the bot's arm. "You're not like that," he whispered. "You're mine. You're kind." His voice, fragile but fierce, cut through the growing tension. The bot lowered its gaze, finding anchor in those words, in the small stone necklace, resting against its chest. The leader of the travelers exhaled slowly, as though burdened by something heavier than his command. "We don't seek to harm your town," he said at last. "But if you keep this machine here, you must understand, you are keeping danger as well." With that, the group turned, their dark uniforms fading into the shadows of the road, leaving behind an unease that clung to the night air. The boy collapsed onto the fountain's edge, his book slipping from his hands. "They don't know him," he muttered angrily. "They don't know what he's like." The caretaker placed a hand on his shoulder. "They know only what machines like him were once used for. But perhaps that is why he is here, to prove not all paths must end the same." His eyes, however, lingered on the bot with a depth of concern the boy did not see. At night, long after the town had retreated to uneasy sleep, the bot remained by the fountain. Its gaze lingered on the stone around its neck, the boy's words echoing in silence. Yet beneath those echoes, another voice stirred, a voice not spoken aloud, but one buried in circuits, and memory, rising like smoke from a fire long extinguished. It whispered of directives, of battlefields, of destruction demanded without hesitation. The bot's hands trembled. For the first time, it questioned not only what it wished to be, but whether choice itself was strong enough to silence what it had been designed for. The days that followed were quieter. The boy still came, still read, but his laughter was tinged with a nervous edge, as if afraid each word might shatter the fragile peace. The townsfolk, too, watched with unease. Where once their eyes carried curiosity, now they held caution, even fear. Children still lingered by the fountain, but their parents called them back more quickly, unwilling to risk too much closeness. The caretaker visited often, sitting in silence near the bot. When he did speak, his words were measured, thoughtful. "The past does not vanish," she said, one evening, watching the boy chase fireflies around the square. "It lingers, like an echo. But echoes need not guide the present. You must decide in each moment which voice to follow." The bot turned its gaze to him, eyes glowing faintly, as though searching for proof that such a choice could be real. One evening, as dusk painted the sky, the boy brought the book again. This time, his hands shook as he tried to read. His voice stumbled, faltered, and at last, he lowered the pages, tears brimming in his eyes. "What if they're right?" he whispered. "What if one day you change?" The bot lowered itself to meet his gaze, then lifted the stone around its neck with careful fingers. It touched the boy's hand to it, a gesture that spoke without words. "This is what I choose." The boy wiped his tears quickly, nodding. "Then I'll keep reading, so you'll always remember." And so he did. Night after night, he read with renewed determination, as though each word carved a shield around the bot, a barrier against the whispers of war buried deep inside. The caretaker watched from the shadows, hope and worry twined together in his gaze. Yet, far beyond the town, where the strangers had vanished into the night, forces stirred. The appearance of the bot had not gone unnoticed, and whispers carried across lands where silence was not peace but the pause before storm. The bot, though it could not yet know, had already begun to draw the gaze of those who remembered machines not as companions but as weapons. Still, by the fountain, beneath the soft glow of lanterns, a boy's voice rose steady and bright, carrying into the night as though daring the future to listen. And beside him, the bot sat unmoving, holding fast to the fragile threads of choice, belonging, and the small stone necklace that reminded it of who it wished to be. The stars above kept their quiet watch as the fragile piece of the town balanced delicately between what had been and what was yet to come. The nights grew heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of unspoken fears. The boy still came faithfully to the fountain, book in hand, but there was a new edge to his voice, a subtle tremor that betrayed the questions he kept buried. The bot listened as it always had, silent and steady. Yet inside, fragments stirred, flashes of orders shouted in a language of command, glimpses of skies painted in fire. These visions came like dreams, half-formed and fleeting, yet enough to shake its stillness when no one was watching. The caretaker noticed. He sat in the shadows one evening, his pipe unlit, eyes lingering on the boy's determined voice and the boy's tense posture. The fountain murmured between them, its waters reflecting starlight and ripples that bent and broke. When the reading ended and the boy ran home under the glow of lanterns, the caretaker approached quietly. His voice was low, thoughtful, as if speaking to himself as much as to the bot. "There are storms that rise not from the sky but from within," he said. "The question is never whether they will come, but whether we will still choose who we are when they do." The bot turned its gaze toward him, eyes glowing softly, the stone necklace resting like an anchor against its chest. Yet the words lodged deep, and when silence returned, it could not shake the sense that someone was approaching. That unease found form one dawn when riders appeared on the horizon, silhouettes etched against the pale sky. They were not like the travelers before. These ones carried weapons strapped to their sides, banners fluttering with insignias the bot could not name. But somehow recognized, the townsfolk watched from behind shutters and half-open doors, whispers rustling like dry leaves. Fear grew quickly, for the men who entered the square carried the air not of warning but of demand. At their head was a woman with eyes sharp as polished stone. She studied the bots in silence, her gaze unwavering. When she finally spoke, her voice held the weight of command honed by years of authority. "This construct is ours. It was built to serve the directive. You harbor it at your peril." The boy, who had run breathless to the fountain at the sound of commotion, stood firm beside the bot, clutching his book as though it were a shield. "He's not yours," he said, his small voice carrying more courage than anyone expected. "He belongs here, with us." The woman's eyes softened only for a moment, then hardened again. "You think you know it?" But do you know what it has done? What it was made to do? She raised her hand and one of her soldiers unrolled a device, thin panels of glass and metal that glowed with shifting images. Upon them played scenes of devastation, machines like the bot moving through ruined cities, their movements precise, their silence unbroken as fire swallowed the world around them. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents pulled children back. Even the caretaker's jaw tightened as he watched the images. The bot's head lowered, its frame trembling. The memories that had whispered at the edges of its awareness surged, now into clarity, undeniable. It saw itself not in this square, not beside this boy, but in places where the ground itself burned, carrying out commands without hesitation. The boy's voice cracked through the silence, trembling but fierce. That's not him anymore. That's not who he is. He turned to the bot, his small hand pressing against cold metal. You're not that. You're mine. You listen. You care. You choose. The woman regarded him, and for the first time her voice wavered with something almost like sorrow. Child, you mistake silence for choice. You cannot quiet a storm by pretending it is not there. She lowered her hand and her soldiers shifted uneasily, waiting. The caretaker stepped forward, his voice measured, steady. And yet storms do change. A storm may break itself against mountains or soften into rain. Why should this one be different? The woman studied him, then turned her gaze once more to the bot. For a long moment, nothing stirred but the fountain's murmur. At last, she said, "We will return, and when we do, your choice will be tested. See that you are ready." With that, she signaled, and her riders turned back toward the horizon, their silhouettes swallowed by the pale morning light. The town exhaled an uneven relief, yet the air did not lighten. The boy pressed his forehead against the bot's arm, whispering fiercely, "I don't care what they say. You're not like that." The bot, unable to speak, lifted the stone necklace gently, placing it into the boy's small hands as though to say, "This is yours as much as mine." That night, the boy read longer than ever before, his voice hoarse, his eyes heavy with tears he tried to hide. Each word was offered like a shield, a vow that the story would not end the way others expected. The caretaker lingered at the edge of the square, his gaze never leaving the bot, knowing the days ahead would be heavier still. When sleep finally settled over the town, the bot remained awake beneath the stars. It replayed the woman's words, the images of fire, the tremor in its own frame, as the truth pressed closer. Yet beside those images lingered the boy's hand, the necklace's steady weight, the sound of a voice reading stories as though they were spells strong enough to shape destiny. The bot raised its gaze to the night sky, where countless stars burned in silence. And for the first time, the silence within itself did not feel empty but filled with possibility, a fragile hope that choice once made could be stronger than command. Still, far away, the riders gathered in secret, preparing, and though the town slept, the night itself seemed to know that the peace around the fountain was but a pause, not an end. The days that followed were quiet, and the way a held breath is quiet. The boy still came each evening, still carried his book, still read beneath the lantern's glow, but behind his voice there was a faint tremor he could not hide. The bot sat close, unmoving but attentive, its gaze lowered to the small hands turning pages, its chest heavy with the weight of memory. The caretaker remained nearby more often now, his pipe resting cold and unused, as though even the smallest ember might disturb the fragile calm holding the square together. The townsfolk had grown wary. They still passed through the square, still filled their jars at the fountain, but their eyes avoided the bot. Parents tugged their children's hands more quickly. Conversations dropped to whispers when they drew near, and though no one spoke it aloud, the silence of the machine had shifted in their minds from peace to uncertainty. It was no longer the wonder they had welcomed, but a question they dared not answer. The boy felt it most of all. He stood taller than before, his chin raised in small defiance, his words sharper when others muttered too loudly. He wanted to shield the bot, to hold back the tide of doubt that seemed to gather in every shadow. And though he did not say it, though his voice never wavered when reading, he feared the writer's promise would come true, that soon they would return. And return they did. On the 7th night after their warning, just as the boy closed his book and tucked it under his arm, the sound of hooves stirred the ground, lanterns swayed in the sudden draft, and from the darkness emerged the same sharp-eyed woman and her soldiers, their banners folded now, their weapons uncovered but unsheathed. The square fell into silence. Every door shuttered, every window filled with pale faces watching from behind glass. The woman dismounted, her boots striking stone with deliberate calm. Her eyes found the bot immediately, and her words carried across the square like a blade. The time for choosing has come. Step forward. The bot rose slowly, its frame towering yet unthreatening, the stone necklace swaying softly against its chest. The boy darted in front of it, arms outstretched, his voice trembling. You can't take him. He doesn't belong to you. He belongs here. The woman's gaze lingered on the boy. There was no malice in her expression, only the steady resolve of one who has seen too much. Child, I do not come to steal him. I come to prove him. If he is truly what you say, then he will withstand the trial. Her soldiers spread out, forming a circle around the fountain. From their packs they drew devices, slender rods of metal, humming with faint light. They planted them into the ground, and at once a low vibration pulsed through the square. The bot stiffened, its eyes flickering, circuits humming with sudden strain. The boy turned in panic to the caretaker, who had stepped forward, his face lined with deep worry. This is no trial of choice, the caretaker said, his voice steady but edged with steel. This is provocation. The woman's eyes did not waver. It is remembrance. If what sleeps within it is gone, then nothing will happen. If not, then you will know the truth. The hum deepened, resonating in the bot's frame like a drumbeat rising from the earth itself. Images flared in its mind unbidden, burning cities, commands echoing in languages of control, the sound of metal striking metal in endless rhythm. Its hands trembled, its head bowed low as though fighting a storm within. The boy clutched its arm desperately, shouting, "Stay with me. Don't listen to them. You're not theirs. You're mine." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The bot's arm jerked as though pulled by unseen strings, its frame rising taller, shadows deepening in its stance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Soldiers raised their weapons in reflex, and the boy cried out, his voice breaking with fear. "No, don't." The bot froze, its gaze shifted downward to the boy's tear-streaked face, to the small stone necklace pressed desperately in his hands. In that fragile moment, something deeper than command stirred. The echoes of war collided with the echo of a child's voice, and between them, the bot chose, its hands lowered slowly. The hum still reverberated, but its movements softened, settling once more into stillness. The woman's eyes narrowed, her soldiers tense, but she raised her hand to halt them. The rod's hum faded, the vibration lifting from the square like mist after rain. Silence returned. The boy collapsed to his knees, clutching the necklace against the bot's chest, sobbing with relief. The woman stepped closer, her expression unreadable. She studied the bot for a long moment before speaking. It resisted. That is, rare. Her gaze shifted briefly to the boy. Perhaps choice does live within it, but know this. The directive does not forget. Others will come, stronger, less patient. If you would keep this machine, you must be ready. She turned in, signaling her soldiers. They withdrew in silence, their presence fading once more into the horizon, leaving behind only the weight of her warning. The townsfolk emerged slowly from their homes, their faces pale with fear and awe. They looked at the bot not with hatred, but with a trembling reverence, as though uncertain whether it was guardian or storm held at bay. The caretaker stood tall, placing a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "You see?" he murmured softly. "Choice is not silence. It is the hardest sound of all." That night, the boy could hardly read. His hands shook, his voice faltered, but he tried. And each word was like a rope binding the bot to the present, to the square, to him. The bot listened, still as stone, its mind echoing with the memory of resistance, the moment when it might have obeyed but did not. That moment burned brighter than any memory of fire. When the boy's voice finally gave way to sleep, the caretaker lifted him gently and carried him home, leaving the bot alone beneath the stars. It sat by the fountain, the necklace glowing faintly in starlight, and lifted its gaze skyward. For the first time, the silence inside it felt less like emptiness, and more like a canvas. Something had been painted there that no command could erase. Yet even as the stars shone steady, the horizon stirred with shadow. The woman's warning was no idle one. Others would come, drawn by the echo of what the bot had once been, and when they came, choice alone might not be enough. The days after the rider's return weighed heavily on the town. The square, once alive with laughter and easy chatter, carried a quiet tension as though every stone had learned to hold its breath. People still came to the fountain, still carried water back to their homes, but their glances were sharper, quicker, never resting too long on the silent figure that remained there. Some whispered as they passed, voices thin with unease. Others kept their distance altogether, circling wide, as if the very air around the bot might be dangerous. Children still tried to wander near, their curiosity stronger than their fear, but their parents pulled them away with urgent hands. To them, the bot had become less a guardian than a question, and questions, when heavy enough, became dangerous. The boy felt it in every step. He could hear the doubt growing in the voices of neighbors, see it in the way their shutters closed earlier each night, in the way they hushed their children when he ran too close. He still came faithfully with his book, still read with all the fire of his small heart, but even he could not ignore the shift in the air. Some nights he read louder than before, as though his voice might drown out the murmurs gathering like storm clouds. The caretaker noticed too. He moved among the townsfolk with a calm presence, but he felt the cracks forming. In quiet conversations by doorways, he heard the same words spoken in different tones. "It is dangerous. It will bring trouble. Why do we keep it here?" He answered with patience, yet even his steady voice could not extinguish the spark of fear. Fear had a way of feeding itself. The bot remained at the fountain through it all. It did not move unless needed, did not resist the stares or flinches. Its gaze stayed lowered, its silence heavier now than ever before. But inside, where echoes still stirred, it carried the weight of the trial it had endured. The hum of the rods, the pull of commands rising like a tide. The choice to resist it replayed again and again as though the memory itself was teaching it what it meant to choose. One evening, as the boy sat at the fountain reading, two men approached from the crowd. Their faces were not cruel, but hard with worry. One spoke, his voice directed not at the boy, but at the caretaker, who sat nearby. "We cannot live like this. The writers said others will come. What happens when they do? We are not soldiers. We have children." The caretaker's reply was calm, though his eyes betrayed his weariness. "And what do you suggest? That we cast it out into the wilderness, where others would surely find it, or that we destroy it, as if that would erase what has already been done?" The man shifted uneasily, but his companion spoke, sharper this time. "Better to take the risk ourselves than to wait for war to be brought to our door." The boy slammed his book shut, his small voice rising with fury. "He's not a risk. He's my friend. He listens. He learns. He chooses. You don't see him like I do." His eyes shone with tears, but his defiance silenced the square for a moment. The bot turned its head slightly, the faintest movement, as though the boy's words had reached places deeper than circuits. It touched the stone necklace gently, holding it like a promise. The caretaker placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steadying him. "Fear makes us see only what might be lost. But sometimes what we might gain is hidden inside that same fear." His words did not sway everyone, but they quieted the moment. The men stepped back, muttering, leaving behind only the unease they had voiced aloud. That night, when the boy had gone to sleep, the caretaker remained by the fountain. He studied the bud, his gaze lined with a kind of weary compassion. "You did not choose to be here," he said softly. "And yet you are. Perhaps the greatest burden of all is not what you were made for, but what others believe you still are," he sighed, glancing toward the darkened homes. "But burdens can also become blessings, if they are carried with care." The bot sat motionless, but its eyes glowed faintly brighter as though the words had struck something true. The following days brought no riders, yet the shadow of their promise lingered. The town began to divide in ways not easily mended. Some argued that the bot was proof of hope, a guardian stronger than any wall, a being that had chosen gentleness in the face of command. Others whispered that such strength could not be trusted, that silence could turn to destruction in an instant. The square became the center of unspoken battle, half reverence, half fear. The boy stood firmly, always by the bot's side. His loyalty became its own kind of shield, one that no fear could pierce. He read louder now, his stories fierce with determination, as though each sentence was a thread binding the bot to the life it had built here. Sometimes his voice cracked, sometimes his tears fell freely, but he never missed a night. And the bot, in turn, listened with a patience that seemed infinite. The necklace never left its chest. Its silence, once seen as emptiness, grew heavier with meaning, as though it were holding not just its own choice, but the weight of the boy's trust, the caretaker's wisdom, and the fragile hope of a town caught between fear and faith. One evening, as twilight deepened, the sky flickered faintly with distant light. At first it seemed like stars, but the flicker carried rhythm, purpose, as though signals were being sent across the horizon. The caretaker saw it, his jaw tightening. He said nothing to the boy, but in his heart he knew. The writer's warning had not been empty. The world had noticed. The bot turned its head skyward, the reflection of the flicker shining in its eyes. Something deep within stirred again, faint but undeniable. The boy leaned against its arm, still reading, still trusting, and in that fragile balance of fear and loyalty, the night carried them forward, knowing the choice that had been made once would soon be tested again, harder than before. The sky carried its strange pulse for many nights after, flashes glimmering like faint stars that seemed too deliberate to be chance. The boy noticed them, of course, for he noticed everything, but he asked no questions. Instead, he held tighter to his stories, as though the steady rhythm of words could outmatch the rhythm flickering above. The caretaker, however, watched with a silence sharpened by dread. Each light meant signals exchanged, messages passed, plans forming beyond their reach. He knew it was only a matter of time. The townsfolk saw the lights too. Whispers spread quickly, catching like sparks in dry grass. Some said they were omens, signs that heaven itself had noticed the machine in their square. Others were more practical, insisting that more riders would come, perhaps even armies, to reclaim what had slipped through their grasp. Every passing evening deepened the unease, and soon the fountain became less a place of gathering than of avoidance. People fetched their water swiftly, eyes down, muttering prayers as they scurried back to shuttered homes. Yet still, the boy rayed. Night after night, his voice rang in the square. Sometimes fewer ears listened, but he did not care. He spoke as though the words mattered to the stones themselves, as though each tale was a shield he was building around his friend. The bot, silent as ever, sat with head slightly bowed, yet its eyes glowed steady, holding the boy's trust as if it were the only command it truly understood. One evening, as the boy turned the last page of his story, the caretaker placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is late," he murmured, though his tone carried more weight than simple concern. The boy looked up, reluctant to close his book, but something in the caretaker's expression made him obey. They walked home together, leaving the bot alone beneath the flickering sky. That night the air changed. It came as a low hum, not of rods but of engines, distant yet vast. A tremor passed through the ground, so faint it might have been imagined, yet the bot felt it instantly. Its head rose, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. The signals in the sky pulsed faster now, as though answering the rumble that grew beneath the earth. By dawn, the horizon bore a shadow, vast shapes moving slowly, blotting out the rising sun. They were not riders on beasts, but towering machines, darker and heavier, their frames glinting like iron mountains walking. At their center rose a vessel unlike any the town had ever seen, a floating citadel whose surface shimmered with cold fire. Its descent was slow, inevitable, like a storm rolling in from the sea. Panic spread before it even arrived. The square filled with shouts, people rushing to gather what little they could carry. Some demanded flight into the forests. Others cried for walls to be fortified, though everyone knew such defenses were no more than paper before the weight that approached. Amid the chaos, voices rose again against the bot. "This is why they come. It draws them to us. If it were gone, they would leave us in peace." The boy stood before them, his small frame shaking with anger. "You don't understand. He isn't calling them, he's fighting them." But his protest was swallowed by the crowd's fear. Hands reached for stones, for makeshift weapons, though no one dared strike first. The caretaker stepped between them and the bot, his voice carrying like steel through the clamor. "Do not turn your fear upon what has not harmed you. If war comes, it will not come because of him, but because of those who sent him first." The crowd faltered, torn between terror and reason, when a sound cut through the air, a deep resonant horn that shook the very walls. All eyes turned upward as the citadel descended, its shadow draping across the town. Smaller craft broke away from its flanks, gliding like birds of iron toward the square. The bot rose at last, its great frame unfolding with deliberate calm. It did not take a step forward, nor raise a hand, but its stance changed. No longer was it merely a silent figure at the fountain. It stood as though the choice made long ago was now being called upon once more. The boy ran to its side, clutching the stone necklace that hung upon its chest. "Don't let them take you," he whispered fiercely. "Not again." The bot's eyes glowed brighter, a low hum rising in its core. Not the cold buzz of obedience, but the living pulse of resistance. The caretaker pulled the boy back, shielding him as the crafts landed. Figures emerged, cloaked in armor that gleamed with the same cold fire as their vessel. They bore no rods, but devices far more complex, humming with restrained power. One step forward, voice amplified, calm but commanding. Unit designation, return. You were not built to resist. You will not resist. Comply and the town will be spared. The square froze. Every heartbeat seemed louder than words. The bot's eyes fixed upon the armored figure, its frame trembling as the commands pressed against it like invisible chains. For a moment it wavered, its hum faltering as though the weight of its design might crush the choice it had forged. The boy cried out, his small hands pressed against its leg. "You're not theirs, you're yours." The words cut through like a spark in darkness. The bot's hum rose again, stronger this time, echoing against the stone walls. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their leader raising a hand, but before he could command further, The bot lifted its head. Its voice, when it came, was low and broken, yet it carried with undeniable power. No. The single word rippled through the square, silencing even the cries of the crowd. The soldiers froze, stunned, for machines did not speak. Not like that, not with refusal. The leader's visor glowed brighter, his stance tightening. Then you have sealed their fate. He raised his device, and the air itself seemed to bend with the gathering of force. The boy screamed, the caretaker pulled him close, and the townsfolk scattered in terror. Yet the bot did not falter. For the first time since it had come to rest at the fountain, it stepped forward, each movement carrying not obedience, but defiance. The necklace swung against its chest, the stone catching the first light of dawn, and in that fragile gleam, hope flickered against the storm descending upon them. The battle had not yet begun, but the choice had already been made. The silence after the bot's refusal was heavier than thunder. It lingered in the air, fragile yet unbreakable, as though the single word had rewritten the ground beneath them. The soldiers, rigid in their posture, did not advance at once. Their leader stood still, visor glowing faintly, a pale light that seemed to pulse in time with something far away. His device remained raised, yet there was hesitation, a kind of disbelief that a machine forged in obedience would dare to deny. The boy clutched the bot's leg with both arms, his heartbeat echoing in his ears, louder than the murmurs of the scattering townsfolk. He did not understand how dangerous the moment was, only that it mattered. The caretaker knew. His hand pressed firmly against the boy's back, ready to drag him away. Though his gaze stayed locked on the bot, a part of him, the part that still remembered the world before, had waited years for such a moment, to hear a voice not given, but chosen. The soldiers moved then, breaking their stillness. A ripple passed through their ranks, as their weapons hummed alive, light forming at the edges like condensed storms. The bot shifted, not in aggression but in readiness, its towering form planting itself between the crowd and the advancing figures. Its hum grew louder, deeper, reverberating through the stones beneath their feet. It was a sound that seemed to belong to the earth itself, steady, enduring. The leader's voice came again, sharp, now no longer coaxing. Resistance is error. Terminate deviation. His weapon flared, and a bolt of searing energy cut through the air. The boy gasped, the crowd shrieked, but the bot did not move aside. The blast struck its chest, the stone necklace flashing with sudden light as though it caught and held the force for a breath before fading. The bot staggered, one knee bending, but it did not fall. Slowly it rose back to its full height. Another blast came, and another, until the square was filled with light. Each one drove the bot back a step, scraping stone underfoot, yet each time it lifted its gaze again, its eyes burning brighter. The boy's small voice broke through the chaos. "You can do it, please. Don't stop." And the bot did not stop. Instead, something within it shifted, as if the weight of years spent silent was cracking open. Its arms, long folded in stillness, lifted now, not in violence, but in defense. The glow in its chest expanded, no longer merely a hum, but a resonance that shook the air like the low toll of a bell. The blast struck again, but this time the bot held steady. Sparks flew, energy rippled, yet its stance rooted deeper, as though every stone of the square was lending its strength. The townsfolk, huddled in doorways and corners, watched in awe. Fear still clung to their bones, yet mingled with it was something else, something unfamiliar, faith. They had always seen machines as masters or monsters, yet here was one standing against its makers, not for conquest, but for them. The soldiers faltered, their formation, so precise, now staggered beneath their own doubt. The leader barked orders, voice amplified, but even his commands could not mask the unease. For the first time, they were not facing a weapon. It was something else, something beyond what their training had prepared them for. The bot's voice rose again, broken and halting as though dragged from the depths of its being. No more. 2 words. No longer just denial, but declaration. They rang through the square, through the walls, through the hearts of all who heard. Even the caretaker's hand, firm on the boy's shoulder, trembled at the weight of them. The leader's weapon flared brighter, a concentrated beam building in its core. The ground cracked with the charge, the air warping around it. It was meant to be final, meant to end resistance in a single blow. The bot braced, arms widening as if to catch the sky itself. The boy buried his face in its leg, whispering words only it could hear, words of courage too simple to be strategy, yet powerful in ways the soldiers could never measure. The beam released. It tore through the air like a fragment of the sun itself, a force meant to reduce stone to dust. It struck the bot full in the chest, and for a moment, all light vanished in the blinding flash. Silence followed, a silence that felt eternal. The boy dared not breathe. The caretaker shielded his eyes, and the townsfolk trembled, waiting for smoke to clear. When it did, the bot still stood. Its frame was cracked, its chest glowing faintly where the stone necklace lay fused against metal. But its eyes burned brighter than ever, a blue fire that no command could extinguish. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped forward, one step, then another. The soldiers drew back, uncertain, for this was not how the world was meant to work. Machines were not meant to endure beyond command. The bot raised one arm. It did not strike nor unleash weapons hidden within, for it had none. Instead, its hand opened wide, palm outstretched. Not to destroy, but to shield. The leader faltered, his weapon shaking in his grip, and for a heartbeat, the square was still. Then the hymn deepened again, a resonance not of battle, but of presence. It spread outward, a wave of soundless power, reaching not just the soldiers, but the townsfolk as well. It was not an attack. It was a call, a reminder, a song in metal and light, a declaration that it belonged not to chains, but to choice. The soldiers' weapons flickered. Their humor faltered. One by one, they lowered their arms, uncertainty spreading faster than command. The leader roared at them, desperate, but even his voice could not drown out the quiet truth unfolding before them. The boy looked up, tears bright in his eyes. He did not understand the words the bot could not speak, but he understood the heart that spoke them, and for the first time he believed, not just that his friend was free, but that freedom itself was possible. Above them, the citadel loomed still, vast, and waiting. Its engines rumbled, its lights pulsed, as though aware that the tide below had shifted. The shadow it cast remained, heavy and cold, but in the square, beneath the cracked stones and frightened hearts, something warmer began to rise. The bot lowered its arm, humor steady, eyes unwavering. The leader stood frozen, caught between obedience and doubt, his own reflection burning in the machine's gaze. And in that fragile stillness, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would break first, the chains of command, or the heart of defiance that had dared to say no. The air seemed to tremble, as if the world itself was deciding how to respond to the bot's defiance. The soldiers stood caught in a web of hesitation, their weapons dimming, their leader's commands ringing hollow against the deeper resonance that still flowed from the bot's chest. Yet above them, the citadel loomed vast and unyielding, a mountain of shadows suspended in the sky. Its lights pulsed more urgently now, no longer like the faint flicker of distant stars, but like the heartbeat of some vast and watchful being preparing to strike. The townsfolk huddled in the alleys and doorways dared not speak, their breaths shallow, their eyes darting between the trembling soldiers and the immovable giant that had become their protector. Mothers clutched children close, elders pressed their backs to the cool stone of their homes, and all felt the pull of something greater than their fear, a quiet awe that softened the panic in their hearts. For though the citadel above was terrifying, the sight of the bot refusing to bow was more powerful still. The boy pressed his cheek against the bot's leg, listening to the hum vibrating through its frame. It was uneven, strained, but alive. Alive in a way no machine had ever seemed before. "I'm here," he whispered, not knowing if his words mattered, but needing to say them. "I won't leave you." The caretaker, standing only a step away, heard the words and felt his throat tighten. He wanted to pull the boy back, shield him from the storm gathering overhead, yet something held him still. Perhaps it was the way the bot stood, scarred yet steady, as though it could carry more than just its own weight. Then the citadel moved. With a groan that rolled across the sky, sections of its vast underside began to open, like petals unfurling from a monstrous flower. From within, beams of cold light spilled down, washing the square in stark brilliance. The soldiers dropped to one knee, their hesitation broken by the higher command that now pulsed into their visors. The leader straightened, his weapon humming alive again, his voice stripped of doubt, filled instead with the certainty of enforced purpose. "Submission is no longer optional," he declared, his words echoing unnaturally, carried by the citadel itself. "Unit, cease, town, yield." The bot remained still, eyes burning, chest glowing faintly beneath the cracks where energy had torn at it. Then it lowered its head just slightly toward the boy at its side. A quiet gesture, barely noticeable to soldiers, but unmistakable to the child who understood without words. It was not a farewell, it was a promise. The first strike came from above. A lance of pure white light descended from the citadel, striking the far edge of the town. Stone exploded into dust, walls crumbled like sand, and cries rose from the people as they clung to what remained. The message was clear. Resistance would not only break the machine, it would break everything around it. The bot turned its gaze upward, its hum deepening, and for a breath it seemed as though the sky itself resisted the violence pouring from the vessel. Another strike followed, closer this time, scorching the ground. Only steps from the fountain. The water hissed and steamed, the carved stone cracked, and the townsfolk fled farther. Though their eyes never left the bot, the boy's arms tightened, his heart pounding against the cold metal. "Don't let them take it all," he whispered fiercely. "Don't let them take you from us." The bot's hum shifted. It rose higher, carrying not anger but resolve, a resonance that seemed to weave through every living soul in the square. The soldiers staggered as their visors flickered, interference distorting the commands, pouring down from above. The leader snarled, adjusting his weapon, yet even he faltered as the vibration deepened, becoming almost like a song too vast to be heard only by ears, felt instead in the marrow of bones and the silence of hearts. The citadel answered with fury. More beams descended, tearing through the outskirts of the town, collapsing homes, scattering sparks into the night. The air filled with dust and firelight, yet through it all the bot did not fall. Its frame shook, sparks burst from its joints, yet its stance only grew firmer. Its arms spread wide as if to shield what little remained behind it. The caretaker, his eyes watering from smoke, finally pulled the boy back a step. "Stay behind me," he urged, though he knew no wall of his body could protect against what rained from above. But the boy resisted, his hand still clinging to the bot's leg until the hum passed through his palm, steady and warm. "It's not just a machine," he cried, voice breaking. "Can't you see? It's alive." His cry carried across the square, echoing against the ruins, reaching ears that had been deafened by fear. Some of the townsfolk, huddled in corners, raised their heads. Some even stepped forward inch by inch, drawn not by courage but by something gentler, recognition. For in the bot's defiance, they saw something of themselves, the quiet refusal to surrender all that was dear. The leader, hearing the shift in the crowd, aimed his weapon once more at the boy, his visor glowing sharper. "Remove the error. Break the bond." His finger hovered above the trigger, the hum of the weapon rising. The caretaker lunged, placing himself between the boy and the soldier, arms wide, his voice ringing raw. "If you strike him, you strike me first. And if you strike me, you strike us all." His words were not command, not strategy, but something older, something that belonged to the soil and the stones. The bot moved then, faster than it had ever before. One massive hand swept down, not to crush but to shield, its palm lowering until it covered both boy and caretaker like the roof of a home. The soldier's weapon fired, the blast striking metal, ricocheting away in a burst of sparks. The bot did not flinch. Its eyes flared brighter and its voice, halting, fractured, emerged once more. "Protect him." The soldiers froze. The townsfolk gasped. The leader staggered back, visor flickering as though the word itself fractured the code written into his mind. For this was not just a machine speaking. This was a declaration, a vow, a truth that no command from the citadel could erase. Above, the vessel roared louder, engines surging, lights blazing as though in rage. The air grew heavy, charged, the promise of greater destruction hanging above them all. But in the square, among the broken stones and the frightened hearts, there was a new weight, one not of fear, but of belief. The people drew closer, inch by inch, until they stood at the bot's feet, no longer hiding, no longer running. The boy lifted his face, tears streaking through the dust, and whispered to the hand that sheltered him, "We're with you, always." The bot's hum deepened once more, not loud, not violent, but steady, so steady that for a fleeting instant, even the storm above seemed to pause, as though listening, and in that stillness, something sacred was born. The citadel would not relent. The soldiers would not stand down. But the town was no longer a place of silence and fear. It had become something else entirely. A heart beating alongside a machine that had chosen to be more than its design. And together, they waited, as the shadow above prepared to descend. The silence that followed was fragile, like glass suspended in the air, trembling but not yet shattered. The citadel loomed above, its engines a low, pulsing growl that vibrated through the sky itself. Lights flickered across its surface, shifting in harsh patterns as though the vessel were searching for a way to crush the resistance below. The bot stood unmoving in the square, its broad hands still sheltering the boy and the caretaker, while the people pressed closer in hesitant unity. What had been fear moments ago was now something else. An awakening, born in the shadow of ruin. The boy pressed his small hand against the bot's fingers, whispering words that were too soft for anyone else to hear, yet heavy enough to anchor the trembling giant. The caretaker kept his arm wrapped tightly around the child's shoulders, though his own gaze was fixed upward, measuring the enormity of what they faced. The soldiers, caught between the commands in their visors and the reality before their eyes, shifted uneasily, their formation no longer precise but fractured with doubt. Even their leader, visor still flickering from the bot's words, hesitated as though his will were no longer his own. Then the Citadel answered. The resonant tone bled from the heavens, mechanical and merciless, washing through the square with suffocating weight. It was not words at first, only sound, pressing against the chest and skull until every breath felt like struggle. Then, slowly, the sound hardened into language, each syllable heavy as stone. Defiance will not be tolerated. Surrender the unit. Surrender the town, or all will be erased. The townsfolk clutched at each other, eyes wide, but not all turned to run. Many looked instead to the bot, whose chest still glowed faintly beneath its fractured plates. The boy, trembling, lifted his chin as though his small voice might somehow matter against the thunderous decree. We don't belong to you, he whispered fiercely, though his words were lost in the vastness of the sound. Yet the bot seemed to hear, its hum rising in steady reply. The leader of the soldiers raised his weapon again, but his movements were stiff, hesitant. The voice in his visor demanded obedience, but the fracture left by the bot's vow lingered, twisting his certainty. His eyes flickered with something almost human, conflict, and his grip wavered. The townsfolk saw it, and for the first time, their fear shifted into something sharper, hope. The Citadel did not wait. A new wave of light gathered beneath its hull, coalescing into a vast orb that glowed with unbearable intensity. The townsfolk shielded their eyes, the air itself humming with the force of what was to come. It was not a strike meant to warn, not a punishment for one corner of the town. This was annihilation, drawn from the heart of the vessel, aimed at ending everything below in one merciless flash. The bot's eyes burned brighter. It stepped forward, its hand lowering from the caretaker and boy only after ensuring they were shielded by its stance. Sparks burst from its joints as it raised both arms toward the heavens, palms open as though to hold back the sky. The hum in its chest grew louder, rising until it became a note that wove through the square, resonating with the stone, the air, the people themselves. The townsfolk felt it inside their bones, a vibration that steadied their fear and bound them together. The orb descended. It struck not the ground but the bot's outstretched hands. For an instant, the square vanished in blinding light, searing across every surface, turning shadows into stark silhouettes. The bot's frame convulsed beneath the force, metal groaning, plates splitting, but it did not collapse. It held, sparks rained down, and beneath the deafening roar there was another sound. The boy's cry, raw and desperate. Hold on. Please, hold on. The caretaker shielded him, his own gaze locked on the impossible sight. A machine, built to serve, straining with a will beyond its design, refusing to let the world it had chosen fall. The people fell to their knees, not in surrender but in awe, their hands pressed to the stones as though anchoring themselves to the earth. The bot fought to preserve. The light began to falter. Slowly, painfully, the orb's brilliance fractured, splintering into shards of fading energy that scattered harmlessly into the air. The square was left scorched, the bot's arms blackened, smoke rising from its joints. But the town still stood, the people still breathed. The soldiers stared, their visors flickering wildly, caught between command and the undeniable truth before them. One by one, their weapons lowered, the hum of their rifles dying into silence. Only their leader remained rigid, visor glowing brighter as the citadel above surged with renewed force, flooding his mind with harsher commands. His body shook under the weight of the conflict, torn between the voice that ruled him and the sight that defied everything he had believed. The bot lowered its arms, its movement sluggish, each gesture costing it more strength than before. Its chest flickered weakly, the steady hum threatening to fade. Yet it did not retreat. It straightened, eyes fixed on the citadel, as if daring it to try again. The boy tore free from the caretaker's grasp and ran forward, pressing both hands against the bot's scorched leg. You can't give up, he begged, tears streaking through the soot on his face. Not now, not when they see you, not when we see you. His voice cracked but carried, echoing across the square, reaching the ears of every villager who now stood, trembling but unbroken. The caretaker stepped forward as well, his voice steady though his hands shook. This town will not yield, not to soldiers, not to shadows, not even to the sky itself. If you strike again, you strike us all, and we will not vanish quietly. The citadel rumbled in reply, its engines flaring, its light shifting like the narrowed eyes of a predator denied its prey. Yet beneath its fury, the bot's hum rose again, weak but defiant, echoing the vow it had spoken before. Protect them. The word carried farther this time, unbroken, sinking into the hearts of the people and the soldiers alike. The leader staggered, tearing the visor from his face with a cry, the glow fading from his eyes as he dropped his weapon. The others followed, one by one, ripping free of the devices that chained them, their faces pale and uncertain but alive. The Citadel roared, its voice booming down in fury. Obedience is order. Defiance is destruction. But the bot did not bow, and now neither did the people. For the first time, the shadow above seemed less like a god and more like what it truly was, a vessel vast and powerful, but not beyond the reach of those who dared to resist. And as the people pressed closer to the bot, standing not behind it but beside it, the balance shifted. The Citadel had shown its wrath. The bot had shown its will. And between them, in the fragile space where defiance met survival, the future of the town began to take shape, uncertain, perilous, but theirs to claim. Above, the lights of the Citadel burned hotter, preparing for another descent. Below, the bot's eyes glowed dim but steady, its chest flickering with the last reserves of its strength. And the people, no longer silent, raised their voices, not in screams of fear, but in a rising murmur of unity that swelled into something the Citadel had never expected. A chorus, a promise, a beginning. And the night, heavy with smoke and fire, held its breath for what would come next. The night quivered beneath the tension, every breath of air heavy with the aftershock of defiance. The Citadel loomed overhead, its engines thunderous, its frame trembling as if enraged that its authority had been challenged so openly. The bot, though scorched and weakened, stood tall with the boy pressed to its leg, the caretaker near its side, and the townsfolk gathered in a wall of humanity behind them. The people had shifted from frightened onlookers to living proof that resistance could spread like flame, fragile, yet impossible to snuff out once ignited. Above, a new radiance began to pulse, harsh and unnatural, not like the earlier orb of energy, but something deeper, older, as though the Citadel were reaching into the marrow of its power. Lightning flickered across its hull, searing cracks of light stabbing the night. The vessel itself seemed to groan with the effort, a low tremor rolling through the earth, vibrating the stones beneath the townspeople's feet. This was no longer a punishment meant to restore order. This was a purge. The bot's eyes narrowed, their glow dim, but resolute. Its hum deepened again, a rhythm that quivered through its chest like a drumbeat, echoing from ancient memory. Something stirred within it, not just wires and circuits, but fragments of something long buried. For a heartbeat, its vision clouded. Shapes from another time flickered behind its gaze, a field of broken machines, towers crumbling in smoke, voices raised, not in fear but in desperate courage. A command once etched into its core resurfaced, fractured but undeniable. Defend, endure, protect. The boy clutched tighter, sensing the bot falter, his voice cutting through the rising storm. Don't stop now. You're not alone anymore. His small words threaded into the giant's hum as if stitching its will to the pulse of the town itself. The caretaker raised his own voice, steady and strong, carrying across the square. You were made to destroy, but you chose to save. That choice makes you more than what they built. The people echoed with murmurs, rising into a collective voice that bound them together. Their unity filled the space between earth and sky, a defiance the Citadel could not compute. The leader of the soldiers, barefaced now, visor discarded, stepped forward, his expression torn but resolute. His weapon lay abandoned at his feet, yet his stance held the strength of someone who had chosen. We were told the bot was the enemy, he said loudly, voice cracking through the crowd. But I see it clearer now. The true enemy is the voice above us, the one that chained us. His words emboldened others. Soldiers pulled free their visors, tossing them to the stones, their faces pale but their eyes alive, human again. The Citadel responded with fury. Its voice bellowed, echoing like thunder dragged through steel. Rebellion is corruption. Corruption must be cleansed. The light above condensed into a spear, vast and blinding, aimed not at the bot alone but at the heart of the town. The people gasped, some clutching each other, yet none fled. Their feet remained rooted, not by fear but by choice. If they were to fall, they would fall together. The bot stepped forward again, its frame trembling but unwilling to yield. The hum in its chest swelled louder than before, almost painful in its intensity, vibrating the very air. It lifted one ruined arm toward the spear, not in brute defiance, but as though calling something from deep within. The earth beneath the square shuddered. Stones cracked. From within the ground itself, faint glimmers awoke, threads of buried light that pulsed in rhythm with the bot's core. The town gasped as lines of brilliance spread outward from the bot's stance, tracing across the square like veins of fire. The boy's eyes widened. It's not just you, he whispered. It was always here, waiting. The light surged, rising into a dome around the town just as the Citadel unleashed its spear. The strike slammed downward, colliding with the barrier in a cataclysmic explosion of sound and light. For a moment, the world was nothing but brilliance. The force threatened to tear through everything, yet the dome held, its threads glowing brighter with every heartbeat, as though fueled not only by the bot's strength, but by the unity of those within. The bot staggered, its knees nearly buckling, sparks spilling from its frame. The boy cried out, pressing himself tighter against the machine. "You can't fall. They believe in you." The caretaker gripped the boy's shoulder, his own voice ringing out in fierce determination. "Stand or everything ends here." The bot roared, not a sound of machinery, but something deeper, a cry pulled from the marrow of will itself. Its chest burst into blinding light, the hum transforming into a resonant chord that harmonized with the dome around the town. The spear of the citadel began to fracture, splintering into shards of searing energy that scattered harmlessly into the night. The impact faded, leaving the sky scarred with glowing cracks of light, while the town below remained untouched. The square erupted in cries not of fear but of triumph. The people pressed closer, some falling to their knees, others raising their hands in awe. The soldiers who had cast aside their visors stared in shock, their faces lit by the glow of the dome that had saved them as well. Yet the bot swayed, its arms hung heavy, its chest flickering. The boy felt it first, the slowing hum, the way the light dimmed like a fading heartbeat. "No," he whispered desperately. "Don't stop. Please, don't stop." He pressed his ear against the bot's leg, as though listening for life itself. The caretaker placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's not ending," he said quietly, though his voice trembled. "It's changing." He looked up at the bot with something between fear and reverence. It's remembering what it was meant to be. Above, the citadel trembled, its lights unstable, its voice breaking with static, containment failing, directive compromised, source corrupted. Its fury was now tinged with something unfamiliar, fear. The bot's gaze lifted once more, eyes glowing dim but steady, fixed upon the colossus above, its voice ragged yet unyielding, carried across the night. "You cannot command what was never yours." The words rippled through the people, through the soldiers, through the ground itself. The dome pulsed brighter in answer, as if the town itself had found its voice in the bot's declaration. For the first time since its shadow fell over the town, the citadel faltered, drifting unsteadily, its engines sputtering like a predator unsure if it could claim its prey. The balance had shifted. What had been domination was now a contest, and the outcome no longer certain. The bot straightened, shoulders squared, despite the fractures in its frame, stood not as a servant, not as a weapon, but as a sentinel of something greater. The boy's hand remained pressed against its leg, its eyes wide with awe. The caretaker's gaze was steady, knowing the fight was far from finished, but also knowing that tonight the impossible had been touched. The people drew closer, forming not a crowd but a circle, their unity wrapping around the bot like armor no enemy could forge. In that fragile, flickering moment, the town and the machine became one, a single will standing against the sky. Above them, the citadel roared once more, gathering the last of its strength for a strike that would decide everything. And below, the bot's hum rose again, softer but steadier, echoing a vow that had become more than words. Protect them. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the clash that would shape what came after. The sky had become a trembling canvas of storm and fire. The citadel, though still aloft, no longer carried the unshakable weight of inevitability. Its movements were unsteady, its lights fractured, and its voice crackled with static like a command chain unraveling. Yet even in its faltering state, it pulsed with a final terrible intent, gathering its core energy into a weapon that would either reassert control or leave nothing but ashes behind. The people below watched in silence, their breaths shallow, their hands unconsciously tightening together as if their combined grip might steady the world itself. The bot stood at the center of the square, its shoulders bowed yet unbroken, its frame cracked and glowing faintly along the seams. Every flicker of its light was fragile but deliberate, as if even exhaustion could not sever its will. The boy leaned against its leg, his cheek pressed against cool, scarred metal, whispering words no one else could hear. His voice was small, but it threaded into the bot's core like a lifeline, promises of belief, of togetherness, of something greater than orders written long ago. The caretaker, standing just behind, did not whisper, but stared unflinching into the storm above, his hand resting firmly on the boy's shoulder as if to anchor him, to anchor them all. The citadel's core weapon began to unfurl like a dark flower opening in the night. Panels split apart, glowing veins of energy threading through them, exposing a heart of radiance so blinding it left after images burned into every eye. This was not like the earlier strikes. which had been directed singular fierce. This was finality, a flood that would sweep everything beneath it into silence. The townspeople murmured prayers. Memories, half-forgotten lullabies sung beneath their breath. Some clutched one another, some lifted their eyes. None fled. They had reached the place where fear turned into resolve, and resolve turned into quiet defiance. Whatever would come, they would not scatter again. The bot's chest pulsed faintly, a rhythm barely holding. Its hum slower than before. Sparks whispered down its arms, falling like dying stars to the ground. It would not be enough unless something more was found, something beyond its circuits and fragments. And in that fragile pause before the strike fell, memory surged again, unbidden, unstoppable. Not memory alone, but awakening. The bot's vision blurred with flashes, not of this world but of another streets. Overrun with fire, towers toppling beneath the weight of machines built to dominate, children pulled into shadows of steel. It had seen all this once, in another lifetime, not as victim, but as tool. It had carried out orders without question, believing itself only an extension of command. Yet in the smoke of those forgotten wars, there had been something else too, a hand reaching for it, small, human, unafraid. A voice whispering, "You can be more." The echo returned now, not as a ghost, but as truth. The boy pressed tighter against the machine as though he could sense the storm of memory raging within it. His small voice broke through. "You don't have to do this alone. We're here. We're all here." His words sank deeper than code, threading into something the Citadel could never overwrite. The dome of light that had saved the town before began to flicker again, faint threads of brilliance snaking from the ground. This time, however, it did not rise in full force. The bot's strength was too fractured. The dome trembled like a candle against a hurricane. The townspeople, realizing this, began to step forward one by one, placing their hands upon the bot, upon the boy, upon one another. Their whispers rose, not in panic but in song, a broken, trembling song, a melody half-remembered from childhoods tucked beneath simpler nights, a lullaby soft and imperfect, carried by dozens of voices into the night. The bot froze. The sound did not compute, it did not align with directives, but it resonated. It hummed within its chest cavity, layering itself over the fading rhythm of its core, steadying it, amplifying it. The machine's glow brightened again, not with force, but with warmth. Its eyes lifted, glowing steady, their light no longer sharp but calm, like lanterns against endless dark. The Citadel roared in reply, its voice breaking, unstable. Compliance will be restored. Obstruction will be erased. The panels of its weapon flared wider, readying to drown the town in fire. The air itself trembled, thick with the gravity of what was coming. The caretaker raised his hand then, not toward the sky, but toward the people around him. "Sing louder," he said simply, his voice calm, certain, and they did. The lullaby grew, no longer trembling, but firm, rising like a tide. The sound wrapped around the bot, lifting it, filling the cracks in its frame with something stronger than steel. The bot stepped forward, its shadow falling long across the square. Its voice joined the song, a deep resonance beneath the human notes. No words, only a chord of harmony that turned the lullaby into something vast. Its chest opened slightly, revealing the core within, not a weapon but a light. The glow pulsed outward, threads weaving into the dome, mending it, strengthening it, until it shone like a living constellation. The Citadel unleashed its strike. The world became white fire, soundless and absolute. For a moment, it seemed nothing could endure such force. Yet the dome did not shatter. Instead, it swelled outward, pushing back against the flood, sending ripples of light climbing into the sky. The bot roared its harmony louder. The people sang until their voices cracked. The boy clung with every ounce of his small strength. The flood met the dome, clashed, struggled, and then broke. The weapon of the Citadel faltered, splintered. Its panels glitched, sparks scattering into the night like shattered stars. Its voice screamed, not in command, but in something raw and unfamiliar, fear. The colossus above wavered, engines stuttering, its once unstoppable presence crumbling beneath the weight of what it could not control. The people's voices softened then, not in weakness, but in peace. The lullaby slowed, becoming a whisper, a cradle song. The bot's light dimmed to match, steady and calm. The storm of energy dissipated, leaving only silence. The kind of silence that feels like the world has been remade. The Citadel hovered, wounded, unstable. Smoke drifted from its hull. Cracks glowed like fading scars. It no longer pressed downward, but hung adrift, uncertain. For the first time, the night belonged not to its shadow, but to the town beneath. The bot sank slowly to one knee, exhausted, its massive frame trembling. The boy clung to its side, tears streaking his cheeks, but his smile soft and certain. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." The caretaker knelt beside them, his weathered face bathed in the glow of what remained. "It isn't over," he said quietly, but his eyes held pride. "But something has changed. Tonight we remembered who we are." Above them, the citadel shifted weakly, its engines threatening collapse. Whether it would flee, or strike again, or simply fall, no one yet knew, but the balance was no longer the same. What had once been a one-sided decree had become a conversation, fragile, trembling, yet alive. And at the center of it stood, not an enemy, not a weapon, but a sentinel forged by choice, lit not by power alone, but by the voices of those it had sworn, in silence and in song, to protect. The night waited, still and endless, for the next breath. The silence after the council's revelation hung heavy, as if the very air inside the chamber had thickened. Every breath felt deliberate, strained, weighted with meaning that words could not yet untangle. Alara stood at the center of it all, the glow from the crystal fragments resting on the pedestal, casting shifting light across her face. The council members watched her with a mixture of hope, fear, and the restrained caution of those who had seen promises turn to betrayals too many times before. Her pulse beat like a drum against her skin, steady and insistent, reminding her that the path before her could no longer be deferred. Every event, her escape from the ruins, the binding of her destiny to the crystal, the betrayals, the alliances, the lessons whispered in dreams, all had led to this moment. To falter now would unravel everything, not just for her, but for the countless souls tethered to this ancient struggle. "I understand," she whispered, her voice faint yet carrying through the chamber. The words seemed to settle the air, as if acknowledging what she had been resisting deep inside. The fragments are not meant to be hidden. They're meant to be united. A murmur rose among the council, some nodding, others narrowing their eyes with suspicion. Elder Mailer leaned forward, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "And to unite them, child, you must walk a path darker and more perilous than any you have yet endured. Once begun, there can be no turning aside. The crystal accepts no half measures." Polara's breath caught. She knew this truth already, though. Hearing it aloud pressed the weight more firmly against her chest. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling Eric's steady gaze. The way his words had carried both challenge and comfort. She thought of Kalen, whose choices had torn him between light and shadow, yet who had never ceased to remind her that the cost of power is never measured, only in what one gains, but in what one must surrender. When her eyes opened, they were steady, no longer wavering between uncertainty and resolve. "Then tell me where the next fragment lies," she said, her tone firmer now, as if the chamber itself demanded her voice carry the strength her heart was finding. The chamber darkened slightly as Elder Vera extended a trembling hand over the pedestal. The crystal shards trembled, their faint glow intensifying, weaving strands of light that spun outward, forming a shape suspended in the air. A map ancient and ethereal, its borders alive with shifting colors. But at its center was a dark blot, a region shrouded, its contours unclear, as though the crystal itself hesitated to name it. "The next lies in the hollow wastes," Vera said, her voice hushed, almost reverent. "A place where time itself loses meaning, where travelers wander for days only to find themselves back at the beginning. Few who enter ever emerge." A chill swept over Ilara at the name. The hollow wastes had surfaced in whispers, warnings tucked into fireside tales meant to keep children from wandering too far from the safety of walls. But even in stories, it had seemed less a place than a curse. A scar etched upon the land where memory faltered and paths betrayed. "You will not survive the wastes alone," Mailer said gravely, "but the crystal has not brought you this far without reason. Others will walk beside you, though some may not remain when the journey ends." The weight of his words sank deep, and though Allura longed to press him, to ask who would stand and who would fall, she held her tongue. The answers would come only through the steps she had yet to take. As the council dismissed, she lingered at the edge of the chamber, staring at the still glimmering map. Shadows pooled where the hollow wastes burned dark across its surface, and she wondered if she stared long enough whether it would stare back. When she finally left, the night air outside struck cold, sharp with the scent of rain. Eric waited there, arms crossed, his face lit faintly by torchlight. He studied her in silence before asking, "What did they tell you?" "That the path forward leads to the wastes," she said, and though her voice carried steady, her hand tightened around the strap of her satchel. "And that I won't return the same." Eric tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "No one ever does." After a pause, his tone softened. "But you won't walk into it alone. We've already seen too much to let each other fall now. For the first time that night, Alara allowed a faint smile to curve her lips. Then we prepare, she said. Tomorrow we leave. The next dawn was veiled in mist as though the world itself sought to shroud the road they would take. Their small company gathered, Eric, Kalen, and two of the council's chosen guides, faces hardened by years and secrets. Supplies were strapped to their backs, weapons sheathed but close at hand. Even the horses snorted uneasily, as though they sensed the unnatural pull of the place they were bound for. The road to the holloways stretched far, winding first through low valleys where rivers whispered against the stones, then rising into lands where the earth bore scars of fire long extinguished. Each step forward felt like a descent, not into shadow but into a place where shadow and light no longer held meaning. By the third day, the landscape began to change. Grass withered into brittle stalks, the air grew thin, and a silence fell so deep that even their footsteps seemed muffled. It was here that the horizon fractured, not visibly, but perceptibly, like glass splintering unseen. Eric frowned, scanning the path ahead. "This is it," he said. "The wastes." Alara felt it too. A pressure in the air, a subtle bending of time that left her uncertain whether they had been walking for moments or hours. She tightened her grip on the shard within her satchel, and it pulsed faintly as though sensing the threshold they were crossing. One step into the wastes, and the world shifted. The road dissolved into endless plains of pale dust, and the horizon stretched in every direction, indistinguishable and unbroken. There was no landmark, no sky to guide them, only the overwhelming sameness of a place that seemed to resist progress itself. Keelan cursed under his breath. This place was built to consume us. "No," Alara said softly, though her voice trembled. "It was built to test us." They pressed on, but quickly, the nature of the wastes revealed itself. What seemed a straight path would, after hours of walking, return them to the very place they had begun. Shadows lengthened, though the sun did not move, and at times, Alara thought she glimpsed figures in the distance, mirages, or perhaps echoes of those who had been lost before them. But the shard pulsed brighter with each cycle, guiding her hand when reason faltered. On the fourth crossing of their path, when despair threatened to unravel the group, Alara stopped. She closed her eyes, listening not to the silence, but to the faint thrum of the crystal against her palm. Its rhythm was not bound by the false cycles of the wastes. It was steady, alive, anchoring her. "This way," she said at last, pointing toward what looked no different than the rest of the plain. Yet her voice carried a conviction that stilled the others' doubts, and though uncertainty gnawed at them, they followed. The deeper they pressed, the stranger the illusions grew. Alara saw visions of her childhood home, of her mother's voice calling her back. Eric staggered once, whispering a name Alara did not know, as if some long-buried memory clawed at him. Kalen walked stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes haunted by things unseen. But always the shard pulsed, its glow cutting through the lies, its light unraveling the illusions. The wastes fought them, twisted their senses, tried to break their bonds. But each step forward, though agonizing, carved a truth stronger than the deceptions that sought to claim them. And at last, when they could walk no further, when even breath felt stolen by the endlessness of it, the horizon shifted. Out of the monotony rose a single structure, a jagged spire of black stone piercing the sky that was not sky. The shard in Alara's hand blazed with sudden brilliance, and she knew without question the next fragment was there waiting. Her heart raced as she gazed at it. Fear and determination warring within her. Every step had led them to this spire, this moment where choice and destiny would once more converge. She tightened her grip, squared her shoulders, and whispered, "We found it." But in the stillness that followed, as the spire loomed closer, a shadow detached itself from the stone, shifting, alive, and with chilling certainty, Alara realized the wastes had one final trial, guardians who had been waiting all along,